last few years have been transitional years for this organization. One of the things that we're endeavoring to do here at Provident 1898 is to preserve and lift up the history and the legacy of Black business in this city and in this state, standing on the shoulders of John Merrick, Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore, Charles Clinton Spalding, Viola Turner, just to name a few. I think it's really important that we understand how we are placed in the trajectory of business enterprise, with this being Black Business Month. As you see tonight, we are actually doing the work of Black business collectively by representing and giving the artists a platform to share their work, having a space for these type of events to happen. All of this is because of the road that was paved by those who came before us. So Provident 1898 pulls its name from the original name of North Carolina Mutual and Provident Association, and they were founded in 1898. So it's yet again another opportunity for us to extend that message and create an opportunity for the next generation of entrepreneurs. Art and culture is essential in what we do. We've been fortunate to have a great relationship with a number of artists, but more importantly with a number of arts curators and organizers. Mavis Craig being one of them. Mavis and I started working together almost 3 years ago when the business first opened. The last 2 years have been kind of crazy because of the pandemic. Gail Belvin and I have also collaborated. As a matter of fact, this show is really inspired by the work that she did in the last exhibition that we had with Whitney and Craig, who did a fabulous job really helping us connect through family images to those things that actually connect us. So when we reached out to William, he wanted to tap into what they started. So we're pleased that you all are here to see what you kicked off. I think it's going to turn into a series. And with that being said,
it feels really good. I think the title of the show is representative of what I see when I look around the room is extended family. And so I really appreciate you all coming in and joining us to highlight Kwaku's work and to celebrate and talk about art. So I wanted this to truly be like a family event, so it was important for me and for us. I think that our wives, our inspirations, our children join us at this event. So thank you all for coming, and I know you need some help over there.
I'm great, thank you.
Okay. So if you see us needing some help, feel free to lend a hand or whatever. This is community, this is family. But the goal of our conversation is to kind of bring out some highlights, some insights about the work you see on the wall. So the bulk of the conversation will be focused on Kwaku's work, and then we'll leave some room for us to address the work that I've contributed, the work that Leticia has contributed, and the work that Afu has contributed, and then open it up to the group to ask questions or give comments. And again, thankfully, this is a room for the most people, I think, that know one another, so we'll keep it pretty casual. If you've ever had a conversation with me, you know I might get a little long-winded and get carried away, so I got some notes to keep me on task, and then asking the Provident team to also help keep us on time. So we'll have a conversation for about 40 minutes and then open it up to our wives and to you all to chime in on that conversation. So Kwaku and I met at the National Museum while you were a staff member, while you were a security member at the Nasher, and I think immediately I was drawn to you from the conversations that we had by your intellect and thoughtfulness, your spirit. I think we share a sort of similar kind of demeanor, and that just appealed to me immediately. And I didn't know when we first started speaking about your background in art. I just wanted to have a conversation with you. I think I was doing a workshop. So what I know about your background from us having built the friendships that you went to Temple University for undergrad, and then to Maryland Institute College of Art for grad school, and then some years later made your way down here to North Carolina.
Correct.
So would you kind of give us some more context in terms of your background as as an artist, as a person, and kind of how you landed in Durham, and then I'll go to the questions.
Sure, absolutely. So I graduated from Micah in 2017, and my wife and I got married that same year, and then she got a job offer down here at UNC, and that brought us down here ultimately. And I was looking for a job, and I saw a security position at the National Museum, and that's how I landed at the National Museum. And it was a good opportunity to meet a lot of community members and meet a lot of local artists and study some art, definitely fresh out of art school. And then eventually I left there to become an educator, so I currently teach art right now. I teach photography and visual arts at a high school in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And we're here today talking about art and talking about what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to start with the title of the show, The Extended Family, and sort of pose a question to you related to family. Can you talk to us about your personal family heritage as it relates to these artworks? And I asked that question because I learned that there were some folks that related to you, but that was not everybody in the series. So I was curious about how family and that title sort of applied to this work.
Good, yeah, that's a great question. So some of these works have my family members in here. I have cousins in here. I have my brothers in here. I also have my uncle. I have close friends, people I've met actually at the National Museum, are also in this series or this body of work. I'm Ghanaian American, so some of the symbols or the semiotics that I use in here are from the Adinkra system. Others are from European alchemy and then Egyptian mythology. So I do a mixture of use of symbols in the artworks, and those are along some of my interests, but also part of my cultural heritage as well. And I have a habit of weaving that in and out of my artwork quite frequently, in whatever artwork I'm making, not just this body of work.
Okay. So you threw out that alchemy word like right away, and I was curious about your interest in alchemy, and if you could sort of describe to us who are maybe less familiar with the history of that, and definitely not your relationship to it, like how alchemy as a concept sort of figures into whether it's the symbology or the materials, like where does alchemy come into your practice?
Yeah, so I think that alchemy comes into my practice with the way I use materials and the way I mix materials. I think that my understanding of alchemy is when you use certain materials and combine them together, it's transformative. And a lot of the materials that I use are intentional in ways to transform or even invert meanings of the icons or the imagery that I use. And for example, I think that when I mix the sort of shredding of paper and some of the hair that I use in some of my portraits, I think that changes the meaning. So, for example, the work on the corner right over there, I printed out colonial flags from when Britain occupied Ghana, or at the time was the Gold Coast, and I blackened the printed out flags after I shredded them, and then used that as hair, and that was kind of my process in me alchemizing some of the material. And that's just like part of some of the things I do when I'm thinking about not only the aesthetics, but what the meaning of the process is or what the meaning of the materials are.
When you started integrating these other materials into the work, was that sort of a segue from some other body of work where you were doing that? Is this the first time that you've experimented with them? I'm curious about, I see graphite drawings and then I see some things I don't recognize. You mentioned hair. Like, how did you decide that you were going to like bring in these other materials into these artworks, and was that something that you had a long-standing history with, or?
So It's a mixture of like experimenting and play, and then it's also like studying other artists and seeing how they use materials. I mean, when I think of that process that I just mentioned, I think of Mark Bradford or I think of David Hammonds. Those are two that stick out to me, or I think of off the top of my head. But you know, a lot of times I'll take like smaller pieces of paper and try different materials and just see what the results are, and not really think if they're archival or not, or if they're sort of traditional. But you know, I'm also aware that mixing media or mixing materials is something that's very ancient and inherent in human history. So if you go to any museum and you look at African artifacts or works, you'll see the materials that they use. Some of the stuff they don't know what they use, but there's materials that they're mixing, and they have meaning, and they're often described as magical or used as potions or some sort of hidden secret language. And that sort of connection to my cultural heritage and that sort of application of art making is really appealing to me, not just as an artist, but also like spiritually and ancestrally. So, yeah.
I love these like threads from your ancestry that you bringing forward with you. I want to make sure as we're speaking that folks, can you all hear us back there? Okay. Okay. And on the other side, Whitney and Mavis. Okay. So when you talk about like you embracing parts of your ancestry for this work, how important is it that for you as that your viewers, their audience, is connected to or understand that ancestry? I think you also talked about the kind of like maybe secret meanings sometimes that get imbued in work when you mix materials. So I wonder, I guess, what parts are, if there are parts that are intended to be secret or coded or layered for some, is there a give and take in terms of what you're offering me as a viewer? Like, do I need to know the significance of the symbols of the materials to embrace and fully appreciate the work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really depends on the individual who's experiencing the artwork. I mean, I leave it up to interpretation. I think for this body of work, I used portraiture because it's one of the most common ways to kind of seduce the audience with beauty. And then if they want to take the time to be inquisitive and think about the materials or the layers or the intentions of the work, then that's up to them. Otherwise, they can be like, oh, he's good or okay at drawing or whatever, or he's got some craft skills and whatnot, and it looks nice, and I'm fine with them leaving it at that. But if there is a curiosity, I think that if you sit with the work, you'll start to make certain connections, and then with the vast amount of information we have at our fingertips, you can definitely look up certain symbols or make comparisons to things in the art historical canon and things of that nature. So.
I appreciate like you talking about sort of luring the viewer in with these beautiful drawings. And I remember Carl's like kind of excitement around the renderings themselves and talking about like your craftsmanship. So I think that's absolutely true, is that they're really beautiful drawings. And then to sort of, as I look at them from a distance, I'm drawn in as a person who makes portraits and interested in the figure. Like that in itself is something that draws me personally in as a viewer. And then I get up close to something that I think might be like chunks of like charcoal or other material, like something maybe like burnt and charred. And then I find these like interesting discoveries with like what you mentioned, hair. So I recognize what I think is hair or thread. So it does feel like an invitation to start to examine like what are these other things. And then when it comes to the symbols, I feel similarly in that I make the assumption that they have some kind of roots in like the African diaspora, but I don't have enough familiarity to know them right away. And so a symbol that we decided to use to mark the labels for this show, I think it's the Nkonsin symbol, which is can you describe what that symbol is?
So it's a link or a chain that is a symbol of connecting humanity.
Okay.
And so it was a great symbol to kind of exemplify the title of this exhibition, which is extended family. So thinking about making connections throughout the diaspora, and you know, it was actually, I remember it was your idea to use that symbol for that reason, and I thought that was a really great sort of link, no pun intended. But, yeah.
I mean, I'm glad you felt that way. So as part of this process of bringing Kwaku's work in, it allowed me to spend more time, asked me to spend more time with understanding certain pieces, and I wanted to draw a connection between your work and the work that we contributed, and so family felt like a natural segue, and also thinking about Whitney and Craig's work in relation. But that symbol that I checked with you to find out if it was okay to use was one that I came across trying to research different Adinkra symbols, but I clearly had not looked close enough to see that the symbol was on his brother's like forehead the whole time. It was like directly like in the work, and then so it made me just look around closer at what other symbols I might have missed for just sort of looking superficially, or just kind of taking a glance at the work and appreciating the things that I was familiar with without looking further. So I definitely encourage you all to kind of like examine and look closely and ask questions and do some Google searching where it's needed. So the symbol on Kofi's head is one symbol. Are there other symbols or any other relevant symbols that stand out to you in this particular body of work that you feel really connected to, that you can name for us, whether in this room or in the room beside us?
I mean, don't get me wrong, my tree is not great, but I did use the original names of the symbols to kind of subvert the English language and have a conversation or a narration around my struggles with England and English and how it can be weaponized in colonialism. But you know, most of the symbols, my recall is terrible, but most of the symbols I know at least what they mean. So for example, with Quedro up there, I used to work with him at the Nasher, and he was a security guard. Okay. And so the largest symbol on the back of his neck is a protection symbol. It means security. And then for my cousin Linda right there, on her shoulders, if you will, is the Shea Dua symbol, or Nami Dua symbol, which is the God's tree. So someone who's like highly blessed. And so she's an entrepreneur. She's always traveling. She's well connected, and so all these symbols on these people more or less have tattoos, or more or less have connections and function as tattoos as a satirical play. But I intentionally use these symbols to describe what they mean to me and describe our connection together. So
that's beautiful. So when you mentioned the word tattoo, I think about the way that the symbols are rendered on each one of the figures, and the way that they're on like this kind of raised surface, which would make me think of sort of raised skin. And so the body, or the manipulation of the body, and adornment comes to mind. So you got hair, you got a kind of tattooing. Could you talk about like the sort of embellishing on the body these symbols? Like, to me, it feels like a kind of empowering thing, I guess, especially in the way you describe like what they stand for, protection, how much they are meant to be empowering symbols, or even beyond that, kind of like just maybe talk more about like the way the symbols function for you and for the subjects kind of depicted.
Sure. So when I was thinking about these works, I was thinking about basically how a lot of times Black people are framed in the context of or the construct of whiteness, and I was thinking about visually what are some significant signifiers when we first engage or initially engage with people, especially Black people, and I thought hair was one of them, and then skin color. And so I was using these tools to emphasize these areas of the body or the figure so that you draw closer attention to what they're doing to the bodies of the figures, and then it becomes a conversation about the political implications of skin, physical traits, hair, and whatnot. And so having these raised areas just kind of exemplifies or complements these areas and the figures in ways that I intentionally want you to highlight or concentrate on. So.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way that you are manipulating the materials in ways that, for me, I make assumptions about why you might have done each thing. And so I guess to hear you kind of draw out the actual why is interesting. So one of those sort of questions for me is when I see the white paper sort of burn up and torn, I think because of our conversations or the way I think about whiteness personally, that's absolutely like political and significant. So that paper itself that you're working on, can you talk about the significance of the way of that paper and the way you've burned it, torn it, whatever, wrinkled it, whatever thing that you've done to it, like how that figures into the meaning of these works?
Sure. So the papers that I primarily work on this body of work is Arches and Canson, and those are both very old Arches and Canson paper, which are very old established papers from France, and they have a long history of being paper that was made for nobles and royalty. And I was trying to make a connection to colonialism. The burning of the paper was taking something that we often see as something that's morally upright or happy, which is light, and inverting its meaning and showing a violent way of using light, and connecting that light to complexion and thinking about lighter things or whiteness, and that often being associated with good or better or our happiness, and then again trying to invert it, and then having some irony with it, because when you burn the paper it turns brown and it darkens it. And so making those paradoxical metaphors and kind of confusing the meanings or the assumptions we have about meanings when it comes to these binary versions of value and blackness and whiteness. And then the fragility of the paper is really interesting to me in terms of identity and how fragile identity is, how fluid it can be, and the fact that paper is really hard to maintain archivally. And knowing that from the National Museum and knowing that from the research that I've done about the art market and how people prefer paintings because they last longer or they're easier to repair, and then me being oppositional or contrarian as I am, doing that intentionally to subvert the institution and that notion that things need to be archival in order to be valued. So there's an ephemeral property that's intentionally there as well.
Thank you. So when we talk about whiteness, blackness, et cetera, I guess I want to make a segue to thinking about your use of color or absence of color. So there are places where there like what looks like glitter or some other like color elements, and then you have this piece that's kind of multicolored. There's a variety of different colors used here. As you created these works, is this a sort of, was this created around the same time frame? Does it belong to a separate series, or how does this piece, maybe especially in terms of color, sort of figure into your approach for the other pieces, which are predominantly black and white?
Sure. So this piece is I would say it's kind of like a segue piece into one of my series that I'm currently working on, which is polychromatic, irregular, geometric, and so it's where I'm like going back into polychromatic schemes and thinking about pattern and thinking about geometry in relation to abstraction and modernity, and questioning our historical connection to what we give credit to in terms of abstract expressionism and the color field movement and whatnot. And Hank Willis Thomas actually did a timeline on this, talking and reflecting about how the height of these movements were right around the height of a lot of political changes and colonialism. And there's a lot of ways you can make reference to things coming into museums and people getting exposed to different aesthetics from different indigenous people around the world, and how that probably influenced some of these painters that we give so much credit to in terms of creating abstraction and doing all these color experiments and inventing all these colors. And so that is definitely a segue. It's not so far removed from the grayscale or the achromatic work that's on the side of the exhibition, but it's definitely a transition, and it's one of the three series that it's kind of a bridge to one of the three series that I'm working on currently.
So that's part of a project that's ongoing.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what is also really significant about the piece is that we don't see the depiction of the figure's face. And with the other pieces, we don't see their bodies. And so that resonates with me personally for a number of different reasons. Is the chosen pattern on the figure and the focus on geometry and color, do you feel like those things need to sort of be separated from each other to be fully, like, I guess for us to focus on the one thing, on the geometry, on the history of these patterns that may be influenced by colonial and capitalist production? Like, is the absence of the face, I guess, an attempt to sort of get us to pay closer attention to that, and I'm putting that on it, but can you talk to me more about like why no face with this geometric abstraction on the pattern of the clothing?
Yeah, so I you're definitely right that the figure or the face is missing for that reason, so that the hope is to have viewers concentrate on that particular area and notice the garment and notice the textile and notice the color patterns, or even where the absence of color is in certain areas, so that you're thinking about it maybe in a more abstract way, or wondering what type of figure, or making assumptions about what type of figure actually wears those type of things and why, and so those kind of questions I'm trying to artistically draw out of my audience.
Which is where the title kind of like gives us more information. Can you remind us of the title of that piece?
So it's Fit to Assume, How Can Whiteness Be Dark?
How can whiteness be dark?
Yes.
Right.
So I mean, it also plays into like what I described about using the flame and then darkening the paper, and then I had just I think it's John Connor. What's the book? It's The Heart of Darkness. I had just finished the book when I was making this work, and so I was thinking about that. And when I asked my mom how to say it in Chui, she was like, "How can whiteness be dark? I don't understand." So it was kind of funny, but yeah, that's where all those ideas came from. The compilation of ideas.
I mean, when you talk about like the subtle humor that you integrate into the work, we've talked about your interest in comedy, right? Or what comics do, like people like let's say Trevor Noah, and you talked about language. And I look at the titles, and in some places you've interpreted the title. Do you see language as a way that if you use it in a title to sort of, do you hope that humor comes out in the title? Is the humor just for you? How do you use language or think about language as a way to like kind of embed your own sort of, not just sense of humor, but your own sensibilities into the work? Like, how important is like that use of language to drive some of those elements home? Like this, I guess it's a loaded question in that I know the thing about the comedy thing, and I know the things where you talk about subtle humor. I think if I encountered the work without knowing that, I might not get the sense of humor. And I felt similarly with work that I do where like it's totally it's something silly that I'm doing with me with no head and my baby or whatever. But someone without seeing it thinks like this is a really strange, creepy person or whatever. Like they make other more darker associations with things that I intend to be humorous. So I guess I wonder, how do you like manipulate the words you use, the images you use to sort of inject the work with the actual sensibilities that you feel, and do you feel like that comes through for folks that experience the work?
I mean, that is a loaded question, and it's a great question. I think that's like the risk of of humor and comedy is like you have to put yourself out there, and sometimes it's a home run and people get it, and then other times people are like, I don't see how this is funny. I think it's interesting or beautiful or it catches my attention, but I may not see how it's funny. I think it's really challenging in the visual sense, in visual arts, especially with still images. But I'm always going to keep gunning for it because humor for me is such a release, and I love satire. I mean, that's why I'm a huge fan of, and a huge influence of mine is Fred Wilson, because he's someone who is a great critic of the institutions, and is someone who intellectually thinks about satire and humor in his work all the time. So,
Do you have another outlet in addition to the work that we see here where you get to sort of play around with that? Is the work primarily kind of similar to the mixed media works we see here, or is there anything else you get to sort of experiment with or play around with that has those that institutional critique or other kind of satirical approaches in it, or is this mainly where it finds a place to be expressed?
yeah, I think in my mixed media art is the main sort of outlet for it. I mean, I write things. I have, I guess, quote unquote poems, but that I'll never release. But
You should release them.
yeah, we'll see. But I write things, and I don't know if they're funny to anyone but myself, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But I am definitely open to trying new things and maybe having a more direct or clear path to humor, or a humorous connection to my audience or to a viewer. But for right now, this is definitely the main platform in which I'm trying to express those more humorous qualities of life, everyday life, and the subjects I'm covering.
So some of the, I guess, like metaphysical aspects of what you do, I feel like I want to tap into more, because I do tend to sort of stay on the surface of like the technique and even like how the material reads to me, and I don't ask you enough questions about kind of like those other like spiritual aspects or being able to sort of foresee things in the work. And I guess I hadn't heard you talk about that as much. So as Afua mentions clairvoyance, how do you see, I guess, like the ability to see deeper than like what's on the surface in what you create as an artist? Like, does that register for you? Like that clairvoyance thing, is that something that?
I mean, I have a piece that we have in the house that I predicted that we were going to have a son, and then lo and behold, there he is. But my wife is pregnant again, and
Congratulations.
thank you. And I didn't know that we were going to have a daughter, so I guess it's like here and there.
Yeah.
And it's not something that's like I'm like super intentional about, or I think when you kind of put your head down, you just work a lot. There are happenings where it could be coincidental, where you start seeing things or envisioning things or affirming things and start attracting certain things within the universe.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I have like refined, or something that I'm super confident about it. But it happens here and there, and it's pretty cool when it happens, or when things kind of line up. So
Thank you. And to sort of bounce it back to you for I see Leticia Indigo made it back in the room. Can you share with us like the significance of that particular those two pieces from your company, and we wanted to include them, but can you talk to us about like their significance and the designer and whatnot, and how it relates to what you do?
Sure. So, my business partner and I, who's actually featured in one of Kwaku's pieces at the beginning of the show, Allow Me, we met over like 10 or 12 years ago. She's Nigerian American and being Ghanaian American. And one thing that we kind of bonded over was just kind of the history of clothing and the beauty that we found in the textiles and the materials that were used within our cultures, but how we absolutely hated wearing anything when we were younger, because it was just not fashionable and didn't feel good, and we would get made fun of and teased, and it was a piece of what made us want to hide all of this and stay, kind of stir away from our culture, or taking any pride in it. So we came together and created a company called Kabong, which in Twi means to join together. And so we kind of blend the beauty of our fabrics with more modernized, American styles that anybody, from the diaspora or beyond would be proud to wear. So we work directly with designers, and only women designers, because that was a big piece for us, was kind of wanting to highlight the beauty of what women can do and kind of the backbone that we are within the Black family, within the African families, everywhere. So we work directly with women designers on the continent and kind of curate pieces. Sometimes we see pieces that we like that they've already done, and then we kind of work with them on different colors and patterns that kind of speak to us most. And we've created an online platform, kind of like an Etsy, in which we sell these pieces and tell those designer stories, so that there's knowledge that there's way more that the continent can provide than what we've seen.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Especially contributing to like an art event when I understand like your efforts in your company may not as far as I know, usually sort of take place in the same format where you're like displaying stuff on the wall and giving talks. So I appreciate you being willing to share with.
And I noticed in your talk and also that you do wrestle with aspects of colonialism and the remnants of that process and things that kind of didn't sit well with you. And I think about that a lot because my parents are Nigerian, and around I'm 28, and when they were like a little bit younger than me, they left Nigeria to come to England and then eventually United States, where they basically raised American children. And we were part of the Nigerian community in Fayetteville, but I guess when I was around 15 or 16, I started to become more intimately acquainted with the idea of the diaspora, and that kind of opened up doors in my mind and made me situate my blackness in a way that I hadn't really considered before. So I'm wondering, is there a part of you, now that you're a father to one, going on 2 children, do you see these cultural works as sort of a roadmap for your children going forward to kind of inform them of their heritage and their ancestors like you touched upon? And is that like something that you could see as a possibility?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That was really insightful. I appreciate that. Yeah, definitely. That's something that I think about, especially now that I'm a father. I think about legacy in a lot more deep and intentional ways. And I think that my parents had to make a lot of sacrifices to assimilate and make something meaningful of this place we call America. And in doing that, I lost a lot of opportunities to gain some cultural connections or heritage. And so I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing artistically, that I'm able to bring up, reintroduce these narratives to my kids so that it's not forgotten and I'm not sort of perpetuating the machinery of colonialism. Because I think sometimes we get so caught up in being successful in what America thinks is successful or what the Western world thinks is successful. We forget that it's really subjective. And with that subjectivity, you can do things and manipulate things in ways where you're still paying homage to your heritage, but still being able to operate globally. And that's the thing, is that blackness is not just something that's inherent here or just ascribed to Africa. It's a global thing. The African history is human history, and so I hope that as I continue to grow artistically and creatively, I'm able to find ways to articulate that for my son and my future daughter.
As an artist, I want to ask both of you, do you find yourself sometimes creating things that just come out of your conscience without you even thinking about, oh, I'm doing this for a series, or I'm doing this because this is what it means to me? When do you have those moments? I mean, as a teacher, I call them teachable moments, when I'm teaching my kids and stuff like that. But as an artist, like, what do you call that? And then does it happen? And then when it happens, it's just like, oh my goodness, now I know what to do with it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think I do those things and they usually end up on like my Instagram page or something, or if I keep them like private. I don't have, I think I'm building up a kind of confidence around like having those things be like upfront. But the idea of like kind of working intuitively without some plan for it to be part of a series or like a particular idea, like where you just like playing, I feel like I had a period where I was doing more of that, and I think the things that came out of that was just sort of exciting personally. And I think when I shared it, they didn't seem to register with an audience as much, so I was sort of, I think, torn about like the professional or the advantages, the professional advantages of spending time doing that work. So I knew it had it like personal significance and it's personally valuable. But once I got sort of caught in this loop of making stuff that I knew like meant a certain thing and could be almost sort of, what do you call it, like sold in a certain way, I maybe made less time for that. So that question maybe just prompts me to think about like the value of just making stuff to make it without like a premeditated sort of meaning or a destination for a gallery or whatever. So that's kind of my thoughts around that kind of production, that kind of playing.
Yeah, I did that. I did a lot of that, like more speculative work or experimenting and playing before grad school. And then I went to grad school and they like saturated me with all these theories and all these ideas and that kind of deadened that sort of energy. So I'm in the process of unlearning that, so things are a bit more fluid. But to Will's point, it's like there's a reality that you have to face as an artist, that there are market forces and you're in collaboration with the institution. And the institution or these market forces expect you to have some sort of presentation or have certain language or terminology to describe that presentation. And so I'm aware of that compromise. And so it's like it's a push and pull. You know, I don't want to overcommit and overconsider the institution, but at the same time, you know, I don't want to be just in a room making art for myself and not sharing it with anybody. So yeah, I'm definitely unlearning it, and I understand the value of play. And what's helping too is my son and the fact that he does whatever he wants and he's discovering the world, and it's like it's refreshing. It makes me think about how important play is, and it's definitely like re-energizing that side of things. So that was a great question. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'd like to start with an appreciation. I was at a talk on the weekend, and an artist wanted to make the point that we are all artists and that we are all creatives. And I think that in addition to kind of evoking this feeling of family and extended family, I think that's what I'm also receiving from this exhibition, and I appreciate that. Like just the recognition that all of these modalities in which we produce and are creative and are represented here, and then there's so many more, and people I think who may not consider themselves to be creative or artists. I think you're creating and giving space to even those people in our dressmaking and in our patterns and how we put them together and the photographs we take. It's all there. So thank you for that. And then secondly, I wanted to ask if the headless portraits that you each have in this exhibition, if you might have touched on this, and I don't think you came to it the same way, but they certainly both read as portraits, even though they don't have heads. And I'm wondering what your thoughts and your intentions are behind like making this portrait without a head.
So, since I do like Photoshop experiments and things, I'm like, well, I just take my head out the whole thing, but I can keep my picture. So it came from a really kind of like vain, sort of like self-conscious place. But the more I sort of experimented, the more I thought about what it meant to see an artist at work, but to not see their face or their hair. Like, what does it mean to encounter a person or anything about a person without seeing what they look like. So how many artists, and this may not be true for any of you, but for certain I've like come into contact with artists who are very impressive visually, like they sexy, they look good. And the work might be trash or not very interesting, but so how much influence does our sort of perspective of or assessment of a person's physical appearance sort of impacts the way we see the work that they do? So that's kind of like what that started to become. And then with this one with Indigo, it became something even beyond what I initially intended, that included me thinking about family and fatherhood. So to your point about it still being a portrait without the face, I totally agree. And that's been an interesting sort of question and exploration for me to like, can I make a portrait or even just a representation of a person that exudes something significant about them without you actually seeing what they look like?
Yeah, and my sort of approach or my arrival to using that aesthetic is also pretty self-conscious. So I remember before I mentioned that when we were younger, people used to make fun of the African garbs that we wore, and so it's me kind of reclaiming that and being proud of it and investigating it. And so it is similar in the sense that it is vain for me as well. It's me investigating that and reestablishing the significance of the process and understanding that there's this long history of particularly kente cloth and you know I did some research at how they would find all these dyes in the forest and process these dyes, and the weaving of the fabric is still done in a traditional way, and there's whole sections in art centers in Ghana where you can go and take photos and watch the process. And I even remember telling Will how when I was younger and I would go to Ghana, I would be like, complaining to my parents that I was so bored, and now I'm like so ashamed that I didn't take the opportunity to soak that in, because I don't know how frequently I can go to Ghana now that I'm older and I have a job and I have kids and whatnot. And so yeah, it comes from that place of appreciating and finding the value or reevaluating my connection to these garments and the clothing, and then also thinking about how we engage one another and how we can make assumptions about what people look like or could look like or wear certain things and whatnot. So someone's going to do.
Thank you for that question, Gail.
But the space is open 24/7. If you need a special tour, just let us know that as well. Tyra Wade is a new member of our team, stand-up Tyra, and so they know you. And
Thank
so
you,
over the weekend, she got a wonderful women's event that happened that one of our ambassadors, Dr. Margaret Bronson, put on. That was 30 women all over the place doing powerful things. Yoga, writing. So she's getting a chance to see all of the wonderful things, but by day, this is a workspace. So if you need to get away from home, get away from the dog, get away from your significant other, come here and work. We have day passes that you can purchase to work here. If you need a suite, there are suites that are available. But, support Providence, support the work that we're doing, and make this your third home when you need to get away from work and home. And now this can be the third spot. Great. So thanks for coming out, and have a good week.
Thank you.
And there's more